Peter.
Got it.
Well, welcome again to another edition of Project Cancer. Here we have Lomax Ward. Lomax I've known for probably about 6 months, something like that, through a friend who introduced me to him. Lomax, we've never met face to face because Lomax lives in Lisbon, I live in Cambridge. But Lomax is right in the middle of his cancer journey. So hand over to you, Lomax, a bit of background.
Sure. Well, thank you, Peter. And delighted that we got introduced by a mutual friend, and I've learned a lot from you already, and a big fan of Project Cancer. So yeah, I'm 39 years old. I have 2 children, one of whom was actually born very recently after my diagnosis, which is something to get into in a minute. So 1 toddler, 2.5, and one baby. I live in Lisbon with my wife, and up until the 1st of August this year, I considered myself a very healthy, fit individual. You know, I proactively looked after my health. I was a marathon runner. I personal PB of 2:49 in road marathons, and I spent a lot of time doing ultra marathons as well as just generally trying not to eat too badly, looking after my health, trying to sleep and be proactive in terms of looking after my health. But then on the 1st of August, I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. I'll talk a little bit about my journey to that in a second. I guess before then, you know, in terms of just basic information beyond my family, I'm an investor. I invest in startups, ironically, oncology cancer startups, including we have 2 colorectal cancer companies in the portfolio that I've invested in. I have 2 partners. It's our own business. We're self-employed. We raise money from investors and invest in sort of early stage, seed stage startups. So I feel very privileged to do the job that I do, and actually now even more so. And that's what I was doing, working hard, building the business, and then sort of got slapped around the face with a diagnosis after a very short series of symptoms. So casting my mind, it's now obviously November 2023, but stepping back to, I think, end of May 2023, I noticed a change in stool composition and also some blood appearing in my stool. Now, not regularly, not every day, but certainly enough to kind of start to monitor it. Now, this had happened to me twice in the past, once 12 years ago, once 2 years ago, just blood, no change in stool composition, but just blood. And both those times I did go to the doctor very, very quickly, because I'd read that is what you should do, because it is a important, red flag. And in both of those cases, it was dismissed as either a hemorrhoid or a fissure on the outside, and nothing to do, internally of more significance. I suspect that those diagnoses were probably right. Certainly the one 10 years ago, the one 2 years ago may or may not have been right, because actually what I've subsequently learned is colorectal cancer is a very, very, very slow growing cancer. And so actually, I think I've probably had this germinating for at least 5 years.
Can I just ask, based on that, can you ask what 2 years ago, what did they do? Did they examine you?
Well, he diagnosed a fissure, like a cut, basically, in the outside.
The blood would come through that. Yeah. Okay.
And I think he may have been right, to be honest. He just prescribed some cream and some antibiotics, I think, because I did actually have lightheadedness, which may have been an infection from the fissure. So I think maybe it was a correct diagnosis, because actually there was evidence of a fissure. Actually the symptoms went away after I had the antibiotics. And so
in the intervening 2 years, you did no other health issues at all, nothing that...
Zero. And as I said, I mean, I'm running, run 5-6 days a week. My resting heart rate is 40. Like I sleep, generally 8 hours a day, to the extent anyone with their own business or with a toddler, to the extent that allows. And yes, there's some stress, running your own business. We moved country, we moved house twice in 12 months, but nothing I would say above the obvious. And then I fast forward to May 2023 and then start to develop symptoms. Can I just let someone in? Sorry, just press pause.
Yeah.
Hang on. So nothing in the intermittent 2 years that would give you rise to suspicion. And then, so had these symptoms on and off, was very busy at the time, kept monitoring them, didn't really take photos, didn't write anything down, but knew it was something that I'd need to get looked at, or at least keep monitoring it. It's not, the funny thing is I think your mind plays games with you and tricks with you, because you think you see blood, and then the next time you kind of think you don't. So then you start to worry, well, was I making this up, or was I not? It's not, you'd like it to be some screaming kind of Thunderbird style red light that's going off, but it's not. And so it's more subtle than that. And so you start to think whether it's just you and that kind of thing. I then actually went on holiday and ate very badly for a week in the southwest of France. Lots of stuff I shouldn't eat, like foie gras and steak, and that actually exacerbated my symptoms. And so driving back to Lisbon, talking to my wife, I ended up thinking I just need to go. So when I say exacerbated my symptoms, that was just more blood effectively appearing.
So this has now lasted about 10 days, has it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this has been going on and off for about 4 to 6 weeks, I'd say, on and off. But it definitely got dramatically worse in July. Went to see a doctor in A&E on a Sunday. Blood tests were fine, no other symptoms, everything else fine. She said you may or may not want to get, what they conduct is, a digital rectal exam. So they, they, quite frankly, they get their finger out and put it, where the sun don't shine.
Not a digital as in camera.
Well, I know. It's like, I wish there was a keyboard involved, but it's the opposite. But it's the old digital. And she, anyway, she said, well, you might want to get a colonoscopy in the next 2-3 months, because it wasn't really any major red flag from her point of view, but yes, she said you should do it. Anyway, I just figured I might as well do it as soon as possible. So booked one in for the following week. Colonoscopies generally are conducted later in life. There's a screening program in the UK. I think it's maybe 50, 55 that people are recommended to get colonoscopies. I think in the US, it's come down to 45 now. But certainly not at 38, 39. It's not something that is recommended. But clearly with the symptoms I had, it was worth doing it. Had the colonoscopy, which, itself was not the most fun procedure, where you take laxative.
No, I've had it done. Yeah, exactly. But at least I wasn't anaesthetized enough that I couldn't talk to the guy and look at the screen, actually, in my case.
You couldn't, yeah. Well, so in my case,
I could sort of slow my speech a bit, but I could actually talk through what he was seeing as the camera went up.
Well, all I can say is thank God that didn't happen to me, because in my case, so I was offered no choice. What I've learned is you can either have sedation for your colonoscopy, or you can be awake and you can sit there and watch the screen. Yeah. I was just told sedation. And bear in mind, I'm living in Portugal. I'm just about learning the language. I just do what they say, basically. And well, anyway, luckily I wasn't awake, because what subsequently transpired, so when I woke up from the sedation 20 minutes later and was being impatient, playing with my phone, thinking, when can I go home? It's about 4 p.m. at this point. The young doctor, who's about my age, calls me in and, tells me that we have quite a bad problem, which he shows me the report, which he's already produced, which has the pictures of a very, what looks like a very, very ugly black and red lesion. He used the word lesion, but I said, what do you mean by lesion? And actually, it's tumor in my colon. It looked like, the Eye of Mordor, as I've said before to people.
Just one of them, was it? Just
one large, yeah. There were separately some other photos of little polyps, which are the initial growths in other parts. But to be honest, at this point, we were not worried about those. And he said, look, I don't, at this point, despite investing in cancer and I have no real idea. So I just said, well, what does this mean? And he said, well, look, we need to do more tests, obviously, but I can tell you now, this is malignant. This is cancer.
Did he take a sample when he was in there?
Yes, exactly. So as part of the colonoscopy, they cut out samples, and then that subsequently got sent to the lab for testing. So then things have suddenly, your life has suddenly changed quite dramatically at that point. My wife is 7.5 to 8 months pregnant then. She's actually relaxing in a spa 10 minutes up the road. So I call her to say, you better come down to the hospital like now. And we had I think she walked in, the doctor was very well, could see that she was 8 months pregnant. It was like, what have we got, a young couple here, and now what looks like quite a late stage cancer diagnosis. Anyway, he had a good manner and walked me through it, called my parents, and then at that point you're a cancer patient effectively. Yeah. So off for at that point, I mean, your mind is racing. They then, from a clinical point of view, want to work out, the staging. And I do nothing about cancer staging at this point. But the first thing they want to find out really is, has this got to what they call stage 4? I mean, as you know, has this actually metastasized or moved to another organ? Because, the general, again, stuff that I've learned since then is if it stays within the initial organ, you have a much greater prognosis. And so they wanted to go and sent me away for a CT scan the next day. And to check, in my case, in colorectal cancer, whether it's gone to most likely your liver or lungs. And just to give you an indication, I think in colorectal cancer, I think if it has spread to those, you have the 5-year survival rate is, I think, 15%. So very low. And if it hasn't spread to those, then it's higher than 70. So in a way, it's quite a big, quite binary kind of threshold that you're sitting on top of at that point. Clearly, I didn't know anything about this at the time, and one thing I wasn't doing was doing a lot of Googling, because I'd sort of figured that was going to be a bad idea anyway, and still is generally one of my things that I abide by now. CT scan, and then it turns out that in Lisbon there is a very good bespoke cancer center here, just cancer center. So I went there the next day, got an appointment. It was what's very interesting and something that I think is sort of actionable from people in their 30s is that I got an appointment with a gastroenterologist who specializes in cancer, but he sees lots of things. And he looked at my colonoscopy report with the series of photos, as I said, of the tumor, but also the polyps. And the first thing he said was, "This is a bad colon. Like, this is just, and what he meant is that there's a lot of polyps in this colon. There's a lot of little growths that have happened, the little mutations. Like, it would have been nice to have known this, quite frankly, because, a good friend of mine does have this diagnosed, and he goes for colonoscopies every couple of years in his 30s, but at least you can stay on top of this. And I just didn't know. And so
you never had one before. You never had one before, so there's no way.
I hadn't, so I would never have known. I think in my friend's case, he had genetic predisposition. But in a way, what would have been nice is maybe you've done one colonoscopy in your early 30s, and then you would have put you onto a different path of monitoring or not. Then he said, "This is bad." To be honest, he called the great thing about all of this is, at least the way I think about this story, is the action points that are being taken literally real time. He picks up the phone to the surgeon and is like, "Let's book this guy in for surgery next week. Like, when's the slot?" And then I'm literally diarizing in my work calendar, like colon surgery. I still didn't know really what that entailed at that point, but I knew it sounded like at least we were doing something. So surgery booked in literally the following week. And then he marched me to an MRI machine to do another, bearing in mind the scan I'd done at the other hospital, which was still taking probably a week. Marched me to the MRI machine to do another test to check if it had spread. I spent an hour in the machine, which actually, if you've got a toddler, it's quite nice being in those machines. You just kind of you get an hour off. But then I think within 10 minutes of getting out of the MRI machine, the radiologist had looked at it and given us the report on the liver. That doesn't do the lungs, but it does the liver. So at least it's like, well, actually hasn't gone to the liver, which is the most high risk. So we could breathe a little bit at that point. I feel at this point, at least we're taking action, we're going. I have no idea what this all means. I spend the evening Googling colostomy bags, the bags. I was Googling whether you could do ultra marathons with a colostomy bag, all this kind of stuff, stuff that's just like now is just sort of seems a bit crazy. And then anyway, the surgery happens a week later, which effectively ended up removing about 20 centimeters. So your colon, I think, is roughly 4 to 5 feet, moved to about a foot of your colon being your large intestine. So your small intestine is...
Yeah, and then joined the bits up, the two pieces up.
So what was amazing for me, unbeknownst to me, is because it was sort of 20 centimeters up from the rectum, you had enough kind of purchase to just staple it together. So you need to kind of divert or have a colostomy, have a bag. You could actually just staple them together, and it sounds a very crude fashion. But that was remarkable. So I now have a fully functioning, or even since then, since the day after the surgery, have a fully functioning gut, albeit with a smaller large intestine.
Yeah.
It was keyhole surgery, so I have 5 very small holes. The recovery from the surgery was very quick. I was out of hospital in 3 days. I was eating and walking the next day. So that was remarkable, quite frankly. And I feel very lucky that surgery is where it is. I mean, the state of this surgery has probably been around for 10 years, but a good friend of mine had a similar condition to me, as I've subsequently found out, and he had surgery which has caused lifelong complications for him. So the surgery, even though it's easy to trivialize it with the Da Vinci robot and all the technology that exists today, but I think that's a non-trivial hurdle to get through the rehab.
Was this is private? This is on your health insurance or whatever was it?
So luckily I'd actually been organized when I moved to Portugal and got good reasonable private health insurance, and then it was covered, and then just had to pay. Thankfully, being in Portugal, the actual total price of the surgery is probably about 1/10 of what it would have been in the States, and then I just pay my co-payment as part, which is very mad. I mean, you're writing €1,000 to have life-changing surgery. You're very happy doing that, finding the money for that out of your savings. So then what happens next? Surgery, recover from surgery, at home for 3 weeks, and then they want to move you on to chemotherapy. What they call adjuvant chemotherapy.
So this is despite them, at this point they hadn't found any metastases at all.
Correct. So what they did is, this is an important point, I guess, is so they removed the tissue, this much 20 centimeters of colon, including the tumor and including all of the tissue around it, and then they can analyze how far it has spread locally, and that took about 2 weeks of the pathology report, and they found that it had gone into what's the lymphatic system, into your lymph nodes. So in my case, it had gone to 13. They'd cut out 26 lymph nodes, 13 of which had signatures of the tumor, which is very high. Very high.
Is that stage 2 then? Is that classed as?
Stage 3C.
3C was it? Okay, yeah.
So the way I view it is, so cancer staging, obviously stage 3 is still what in colorectal terms, stage 3 is still local, and then you have ABC, and ABC is defined by how many of your lymph nodes get infected. So I think A is like 0, B is below 5, and C is above 5. Because I was 13, I was kind of way up, and so it's very close. Assuming that we can talk about it in a minute, but my big risk is that I do have a metastasis, right? That suddenly it crops up in another part of my body, and that is a live risk. I'm discounting it. I'm assuming it's not going to happen. But if that doesn't happen, I've definitely gone as far locally as you can possibly go without going global, without going to your next organ. And so I've sort of, in the way I think about it metaphorically, as I've walked up to the abyss, looked into it, and have started to walk back from it, but that doesn't mean, or started to walk alongside it, but it's still there. It's still a real possibility for me. So they said to me that because of that level of local advancement, if I did no more treatment, I just carried on living life now, I would have a 40% chance of this reoccurring, which is very high.
In the colon though, not
no, not in the liver, in the lungs, like somewhere else. Let's go to stage 4.
Yeah.
So then they offer you the opportunity of chemotherapy. There's only a couple of sort of approved, standardized. One thing I've learned about chemotherapy is, I've learned about cancer is it's very heterogeneous. No one's cancer is the same. Literally every single cancer, every single person's journey is different. And the same with chemo, generally like there's just so many different concoctions and ingredients and like the way they structure it that it's very different. But in my case, yes, there's one, approved like method that is a 6-month kind of treatment of chemo.
And is that dependent on your age or your fitness or anything, or is it just blanket for whether you're 12 or 82? Do you know?
I think it's the same, 12 or 82. Yeah. I think they would
the
dosage and the intervals. And there is so yes, so I think that's the main difference. And then the chemotherapy, as you talked about before or on the podcast, is killing fast growing cells. I didn't know anything about chemotherapy really, and so I'd naively, although the analogy still stands, it sort of feels like a kind of scorched earth, like napalm strategy, which actually is, if you're describing it to your granny, generally is about right. I mean, it's just killing everything, good and bad.
Not everything, that would be.
Well, no, of course, not everything, but
a lot of collateral damage, basically.
A lot of collateral damage, a very, very blunt instrument, and it takes a lot. It can take a lot of toll on you.
Yeah.
So I think, and then this ties into like how you kind of deal with that, and what you can control, because you can't really control the chemo. I mean, you can control the dosage, well, the doctor will decide that. In my case, I'm doing what chemo is obviously in cycles. I'm doing a 3-week cycle. At the beginning of 3 weeks, I have a 3 to 4 hour infusion where I just sit there and the drugs come in. And then I have another drug of pills for 2 weeks. And then I get a week off for good behavior. And then I start again, 8 times 3, 24 weeks, 6 months.
But you also have to have your bloods done before the first. So
exactly.
Has it been delayed at all? Has it been delayed because of different blood?
Not yet.
Right.
Not yet. And the main thing they're checking is your platelet count in my case. And that's generally been it's reduced, but it's robust enough for them to conduct the chemo.
So before we go on to how you've coped with that, can we just talk about diet and things? Because you obviously did some research in the same way I did, and you've made some small tweaks or maybe big tweaks to your life, haven't you?
Yeah. So I think the funny thing is, the first thing is that I don't know, my experience of oncologists is they are focused on, in my case, the chemotherapy and managing your body through the chemo. And they also, they've been, they are not so interested in a whole bunch of like alternative, more experimental kind of approaches. They want to do what is tried and tested. And so my oncologist, in my case, is like, do the chemo. I would ask him, what should I eat? How should I exercise? He said, look, do whatever you want. Because he's like, there is no single randomized clinical trial of the sufficient standard that has proved to me that either making these modifications on your diet or this modification on your exercise or this on your sleep or this on your stress makes any difference to the chemo. So he's starting from a very like first principles conservative medical approach. He, and I'm sure many oncologists will kind of start with that. Eat what you want, drink what you want. Well, not say drink what you want, but stay healthy, stay happy.
Happy. I think happy is the main thing. Just live as much of a normal life as you can. Yeah.
Now, the problem is that I kind of refuse to believe that. And then, clearly if you do start spending time Googling or speaking to people who are a little bit more, I wouldn't necessarily say forward thinking, but more open-minded in this regard, there is some there are some early studies, some of which are actually reputable, like clinical studies that actually show some efficacy. And this can range from anything from, fasting around the time of your chemo infusion, or just fasting generally, or dietary changes, or exercise, or mental exercises. And so there's a whole world of that. And the problem, of course, is it's a bit of a rabbit warren that you could get lost in very, very quickly. For me, I wanted to dip into that world, and I did. And I sort of think, well, look, let's just try and let's sort of look at some of this, not try and get carried away, and try and make changes that seem to be sensible based on the preliminary data out there, but also seem to fit in with just, what's good for me and what keeps me happy, as you say. So spent how did I do that? Spoke to other cancer patients who had done some of this research and done some filtering already, which was great, and also lived it and experienced it. Clearly, there's some Googling you can do. I mean, there are some books you can read. There's lots of experts who'll charge you €1,000 a session to talk to, plenty of those, mainly in America, but, so I did a bunch of that, and I concluded that, look, there's 4 kind of variables that are within your own control. The oncologist is controlling the chemo. They're controlling any other funky kind of immunotherapies or experimental drugs that might be available. I think that's another piece of work area where you can do your own work, but let's just park that for now. So for me, it was just very simple, like diet, exercise, sleep, and stress, and try and put some of my own inputs into that to try and control. And even if it's placebo and it makes no difference to anything on the cancer side, at least it makes it feel like I'm doing something. And also making positive steps in any of those things cannot be a bad thing anyway, even if it's like not related to the cancer. So clearly sleep, just walking through each of those, I think sleep, nothing, to be honest, mind-boggling other than trying to be proactive, trying to get 8 hours sleep, building in a siesta as much as I possibly could. I mean, we had a baby born 3 weeks after my surgery, so that kind of did impact it. But, in my case, actually, despite being a new father, I am sleeping in my own room. So my wife has been amazing in that respect, but that's been very important to me to make sure you get your sleep and actually being proactive on siestas, which is something normally I would, life is too short for a siesta was my philosophy before, but now I would kind of almost build it.
You live in the right country to do that, the further south.
Well, I know, exactly. So it's good. It's good that I'm here. So,
yeah.
But no, I didn't bother investing in. I already have a smartwatch which can track some of the basic sleep metrics. I didn't bother getting an Aura ring or looking at some of the more sophisticated mattresses. I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing to do, but it's just like that's just one thing I did. Stress, I tried to build more breathing. I'm not something I'd done proactively a lot before, but and this is the one I've done the least work on, to be honest, because I've had the least headspace with the baby and everything, but trying to do some breathing exercises, spend time, in the fresh air. I mean, really, really very basic, quite frankly. I'm sure I could do more there. But actually I'm not stressed. So in a way, I don't feel like it's a problem I need to run at. Exercise, used to do a lot of exercise, as I said. I just built in a very simple exercise schedule, which in my case was swimming and some basic weights. And so just made sure that you do that. And even if on the days in chemo where you are feeling awful and you can't get to the pool, trying to just get 5,000 to 10,000 steps in is just become a mantra for me. So just doing that, very basic. It comes like as someone who used to go and run 10 miles in my lunch break, like walking around the block as my exercise for the day feels a bit depressing, but actually no, it's not. It's like it's amazing how cathartic that is in now. And then on diet, I did spend more time, and I went full at the beginning, having researched it, and my philosophy was to try and boost my immune system in the hope of fighting the cancer, and to sort of concomitant to that, reduce inflammation. So try and eat a very, very simple diet. So in my case, I went, and I've rode back from this a bit, but I went full vegan, gluten-free, because I suspected that I had a gluten intolerance, not celiac, but a kind of, undiagnosed gluten intolerance, sugar-free and very low carb, because there is, I think you and I have talked about this before, there is research that suggests in a very, very simplistic way that like sugar, glucose feeds cancer, which is like one way of explaining it to my granny, is that actually there is a school of thought which not many oncologists subscribe to, but some of the more open-minded ones do, that you can attack cancer metabolically, which basically means you can starve it. So how do you do that? Okay, there's a whole bunch of things you can do, but in my case, simplistically, it was reduce sugar to 0. And in my case, reduce carbohydrates to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. And even then, that's a guideline for me. I'm not.
And you did this in an intelligent way, in that you made sure you had enough balance of everything you needed and sufficient quantities.
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I'd like to, I think it was, I lost a lot of weight is the answer. Yeah. I lost about 8 kilos in quite a short period. But but I did manage to get to stabilize. I basically ended up eating a lot of, because if you go carb, if you reduce carb to below 100 grams, that's only 400 calories a day of carbohydrates. And you know, that's not a lot. And then on the protein side, you're generally, I sort of kept to like this sort of standard, like 1 gram per kilogram of carbohydrate, of protein a day. So roughly, let's say 70 to 80 grams, in my case, 70 grams of protein. Again, that's only 280 calories, right?
Yeah.
So you've actually got, from protein and carbohydrates, you only got about 550, 600 calories, right? Which is just not enough. So then I just went nuts on nuts, basically. Had a lot of nuts. You know, having gone vegan, one thing I started to invest my money in was I got a chef to help me at the beginning, because I just thought it's very depressing to be get to the end of each day, especially when you've been, you know, with a toddler and you're boiling lentils for the nth time. So I got someone to help me to make yummy kind of vegan food. And then actually I stopped that because I have some more time now and I'm not working. I enjoyed cooking. And so I've actually kind of taught myself vegan recipes. So that's been a bit of a journey, but been good. But one thing I would say, having started out very militant on that, I've slightly rode back. So I've phased back in some white meat and fish, because I just don't think it can be a bad thing, like very simply grilled. And
so you could push your calorie intake up by what, another 500 or 1,000 or something.
Exactly. And also just like, it just makes, it's for morale again, like there's you know, there's also like a lot of vegan diets quite high on carbs. So if you're doing vegan and low carb, you really are minimizing. The Venn diagram gets very
carrots, not even carrots. Probably there's probably
it's exactly. So in a way, you know, a part of this exactly as you said, it's about managing morale. And it's like, if I want to, you know, grill some chicken, because I don't want to eat lentils again, I'm going to do it. And so, or grill some fish. So I've been doing that, eating a very simple diet. I would say this is not, you know, I'm not doing this 100% of the time, because, you know, we have friends who come to stay, for example, and you know, if we want to go to a restaurant, and you know, every time you go to a restaurant, it's always something slightly richer than you would like.
And of course, as you say, there's no trial, so you're doing your best.
But I'm doing an 80-20 kind of rule, 80-20, just like, you know, just sort of majority of the time.
But what it means, you don't know whether you will have improved your cancer journey, but the chances are you haven't made it worse, which is the main thing.
Exactly. So I've been doing that on the diet, and as I said, even if it's placebo, it's generally been good for my health and it's good for my state of mind. And
let's talk about the chemo now. So you've just finished your 4th cycle. So how's that been for you?
Actually, and I'm feeling it now today, is the chemo. At the beginning, I was surprised by how mild it was, how fine it was. But then there definitely is an aspect, it gets cumulatively worse. So I've now done 4 of my 8 cycles, and the 4th was definitely the worst. The nice thing about it, at least in my case, and I think this chimes with other people, is that the side effects do become very predictable, not only in terms of the actual what they are, but also the timing of them. I can almost time now, assuming I've been having my infusions at 3 p.m. My infusion, the drug infusion, every Tuesday at 3 p.m. I can almost time that Friday lunchtime I'm going to start falling off a cliff. So I know that for the first few hours on the Tuesday evening, I'll feel very bad, and then I'll be fine for 2 days. The nice thing is you can then plan your life around that. And so actually, you know, you can plan things with friends, with family, and that just makes the whole thing, you know, anything in life, when it's more predictable, is more known and therefore more manageable. I would say, compared to the films I was grown up with and my impression of chemo, and even when I mentioned to my friends that I'm on chemo, I think they think I must be going through the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. I mean, to be honest, it's not as bad as that, at least in my case. You know, it does help that I'm not losing my hair from a morale perspective. Like my chemo doesn't have that as a side effect. So I think that's sort of helpful.
So it's mainly nausea. It's mainly an intestine. There's a gastro.
Definitely very bad stomach, nausea, and then the tiredness. It's like a very bad hangover. Like this weekend was probably the worst of all the kind of days I've had, and you're just sort of, you've got aches all over your body and you're operating at, 40% just very slowly, which, it's again, you could just go to bed and it would be fine. But it's not a great way to live your life. And if you've got a toddler and whatever, it definitely kind of chips away at you. But again, like any hangover, to be honest, if you get out of bed and just get on with it, you can just kind of forget about it and function. You can still do most
and you're
things.
is it a 3-week cycle? Did you say you're on
3-week cycle, so 4 more to go.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is, I would love to maintain the same dosage and the same, in a way, like we've got kind of, I think about it having as like we have our foot to the neck of the cancer now, and I want to keep that pressure up where we can. And so, as I mentioned, we do a blood test before each cycle. So if that shows like that my body is flagging, in this case, my platelet count is down, then the doctor will reduce the dosage or will delay the start of the chemo. Which probably, if it's just one-off, doesn't make that much difference. But to my mind, it's like, no, I want to keep, while I'm in the woods of the chemo and going, we might as well go as hard and as consistent and as upfront as we can on it. So while we're doing that, I'm happy. And every time the chemo does make you feel bad, you think, well, look, it's, it is actually, it should be having the desire.
Well, let's talk about that. So what points do they do a check to see whether it's made any, not made any difference, because you don't have the metastasis, the Mets. So what's happening about testing?
This is the slightly funny thing about it, because you would think that you're, navigating your ship, like piloting your way up the channel with some checking the depth or whatever it may be. That isn't really happening. I mean, literally, there's no way to. There's nothing that we're doing apart from one thing we can talk about in a minute. Really, in terms of the standard care pathway and standard of care, is really checking how this is. This could not be working and we wouldn't know. So all of this could be for nothing. Now the way they check is they do imaging scans every, let's say, 6 months, and at that point, what they're looking for is in my case, a new tumor cropping up in probably the lungs or liver or maybe somewhere else. Feels very archaic to me from a couple of reasons. One is it just feels that at that point the horse has already bolted. We're collecting the data as to how things are going late, and also it's already too late if something shows up. I mean, clearly if it shows a negative, that's great, but so in a way you feel like you're kind of fumbling away in the dark as you go through chemo, because you think it's working, but you don't know. You're not really getting any.
You're not even sure with a scan, are you? Because you don't have anything to show the scan. The index scan, as they called it, didn't have anything on it anyway, did it?
No.
Yeah.
Exactly. You need something of you need a very good radiologist. You also there's always, one thing you've learned is there's always a benchmark or a baseline, and it's without a baseline, what. So it is, you definitely feel like you're fumbling away, which I think it's no bad thing, because I mean the sort of counterfactual is that I already had a baseline and things were bad and it already was stage 4. So in a way, it's great that there's a sort of blank sheet of paper, because if there wasn't, then it's not good for me. But at the same time, as you're doing all this treatment, and you would sort of think with modern medicine and just the way that we live our lives these days with iPhones and everything, you had some kind of dashboard telling me how you're doing, as you go through this life-changing or life-impacting treatment, but you're not. You have no dashboard whatsoever. The only caveat, caveat to that is there is this new technology which you and I have talked about before. This, called circulating tumor DNA technology, ctDNA, which is a subset of cell-free DNA, which looks in your blood for fragments of the tumor that might be circulating. Which has not created a new tumor somewhere, but it's just fragments, exactly, just circulating in your blood.
It's waiting to settle, basically, isn't it?
Exactly. And so in my case, I did one of those tests and it came up negative, suggesting there is none. Now that's great. Now I can't laugh all the way, to the bank in that, because there's issues around, what's the sensitivity of the test? It was still very, very early after my surgery, so it's still, it needs to be done regularly. But then so those tests are available. They're not, always covered by the NHS or by insurance. So they cost a couple of grand out of pocket. So you need to make a decision as to whether you want to do those. And again, then this takes you to this question of actionability, which is something I have learned through this process, which is, doctors are very focused, I guess quite rightly, on actionable data, like data that they can make decisions off. In my philosophy, and a bit like the dashboard philosophy, is let's get as much data as we can, and then kind of make whatever decisions we can. But like the doctors sort of don't, in a way, they're not interested in information that isn't actionable. So if you told your doctor, oh, I can access all of this data, but it's not going to be actionable, they're like, I don't want it. Let's not bother. I mean, some of them will have a different view on that, but it's like, that's almost the kind of starting point. And that's a good, this circulating tumor DNA is a good example, because I do the test and it kind of either says positive or negative, you have got this fragments in your blood. There's actually no decision that we would make off the back of that. I'm not going to increase my chemo because we're already going to the max on the chemo. They're not going to decrease my chemo because it is negative, because that would just be stupid, or that would just be negligent. And so, yeah, it's just like you're in this world of like, well, I got this data, it's interesting. And I thought about doing another test now, but then again, it's like, it's not going to drive any decision in the short term.
Yeah, you see, it's very different for me, of course, because it's already got the mets all over the place. So if there was circulating tumor DNA, I'd get them probably to do another scan more, sooner than the one that was programmed in every 3 months. And then from that, if there's a tumor, they can address using some of the method.
That's a very
my
good
situation is quite different from you. Yeah.
Well, no, in a way, the same could apply to me. For example, if I did another ctDNA blood test like today, and I got the result back next week, and it did show positive, that would encourage us to do a imaging scan as soon as possible.
Exactly.
But in a way, I'm already telling him to do. I'm already asking him, and he's open to doing an imaging scan as soon as possible anyway. So in a way, it's like, it doesn't really make a difference.
But at the moment, when is your imaging scan programmed at the moment? At the end of the cycles as well?
Well, it is at the end, but I've already sort of handshook with him that we're going to do it just after Christmas. Just after
about halfway point, or just after halfway?
Just after 2/3, yeah, exactly.
2/3, yeah.
So that's been an interesting thing, and I guess that kind of takes you just on this whole data and everything. It takes me my mind a little bit back to the whole screening and just general prevention and data around cancer. Is the big picture is, if you get cancer early, it's generally treatable unless you have something extremely like aggressive or rare. And so if you operate with that principle, then clearly you want to be screening as much as you can from whatever age, 30 onwards. Now, healthcare systems don't like doing that because it's expensive, and it can cause a whole bunch of issues for them on a kind of population level. So as a patient, I think it's for you to actually take the proactive decision to start investing your own money and time in that process. Now, there are a bunch of people, and I thought about this before, who will tell you, as well, you should be careful about that because you get false positives and you might get stressed. And and that is a very valid concern. But I'm knowing what I know now, and having considered in the last 2-3 years, absent of my colon issue, a general screen, an imaging screen, but now you can do these new, what they call multi-cancer early detection blood tests, like the Grail and Garden tests, I'm just of the view, just do it and deal with it. If you have a slightly neurotic disposition, then maybe that's the one case where you wouldn't. But if you're able to manage your mental game, I think you just do it and get the information, because
the issue is that you're probably one of the worried that's even triggered you wanting to do it. So
that is a very good point.
So this problem with false positives is pretty big, really.
It is a big problem.
It
is definitely a big problem. And what happens? You go and get an MRI and a whole body MRI scan, and then they do a false positive.
You've got things just there, and they're mostly benign, but there's a risk in the operation, etc., etc. Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, sitting where I'm sitting now, if I'd done a whole body MRI 2 years ago, there's a high chance we would have picked this up at stage 1 or stage 2. So in which case, I'm just like, it would have been a no-brainer. So I'm like, I'm sorry, that's how I think about it now. But that's on just general data and everything and knowing about.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's the way the world is going, and the technology will get better and better and better. Which is slightly on the early stage.
Okay, we ought to wind up in a moment. So anything else you would like to add to this podcast? Any other messages?
Yes, no, I mean, I think it's a clearly being diagnosed with cancer at any stage of your life is an absolute bolt from the blue. But it can be a gift. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn a lot about the relationships you have. I think I've learned more about the relationships that I have with my friends and my family from this process. And you know, it is very hard, and there are very, very dark moments. But clearly some prognoses are much, much worse than others. But this is life, I'm afraid. And, you know, life just gets very serious at some point. And I'm afraid trying to be as positive as you can is the only really way to deal with it. And there's tons of great stories about people who've fought cancer with positivity and shown amazing results. And I'm a believer in that. So, yeah.
Well, you're definitely showing that. I mean, that's why we're getting on well, because we're both looking at our cancers in a similar way in terms of positive outlook, making change, research, etc., and helping others, which is what this channel is all about. So we'll leave it there. So thank you very much indeed. What I'll do is probably come back to you, possibly even on another podcast in 4 or 5 months' time, see how you're getting on, assuming I'm still okay, of course. Otherwise, I will post something. So thank you very much indeed, and thanks everybody for listening. Thank you.
Love to. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.